Hi, Dharma friends. This is Paul again. And today I'd like to give you a talk about one of the most basic concepts in the Dharma of Master Shinran. This concept is the idea of self-power versus other power. So first let me explain what that means. In all of the 84,000 paths within Buddhism, and that number, 84,000, is a metaphorical number to describe that there are many, many, many paths in the Hinayana, the Mahayana, the Vajrayana, in all of the paths in the three major schools, except for one, there is a common idea. And the idea is that in order to attain Buddhahood, the aspiration of Bodhi mind, which is to become a Buddha, you must engage in some sort of practice or other in accordance with the school of Buddhism with which you are involved. So the Hinayana has one set of practices that are very common, although there are variations between the sects. The Mahayana, the same thing. There are different sects and different approaches, but they all depend on some basic ideas that are from the Mahayana Sutras. And the Vajrayana, or Tibetan Buddhism, the same thing. And all of these schools talk about Buddhism as if it was a mountain that we're going to climb by doing whatever it is you need to do to climb the mountain. And it's a long trip, and you go step by step by step, and it's very, very difficult. And you can actually fall all the way down the mountain even after you've climbed up a long ways. And we've seen in my lifetime, over the last 30, 40 years of my life, I've watched carefully, and we've seen many, many famous Dharma teachers and teachers from other religions and some New Age teachers really get into some disastrous karmic trouble and fall all the way down the mountain of enlightenment. Now, this can happen to you, it can happen to me, it can happen to the greatest teacher on the planet. But the people who practice self-power Buddhism believe that even if you go all the way to the bottom of the mountain, you're going to start climbing up again and again and again. And sooner or later, you're going to reach the summit of the mountain and you will become a Buddha. That's self-power thinking. Now, what Shinran says to us, as well as his teacher, Master Honen, as well as the other Pure Land masters that Shinran talks about who really unfolded the Dharma until he really completed the unfolding with his own teaching. Shinran says, we are living in an age where it's simply not possible to attain Buddhahood by your own self-power efforts. I'm going to briefly explain why, and I'll go into more detail on why some other time perhaps. But the reason is because there are actually three different ages of the Dharma since Shakyamuni arrived in our midst about 2,500 years ago. The first age is called the Age of Right Dharma. It was the time when Shakyamuni was alive, and for the next 500 years or so after he left us and took on a transcendental body again. And during this time, Shakyamuni's own energetic field, we call it in Buddhism the Buddha field, was so powerful and so profound that even people who you would never think would become serious Buddhists and make serious progress on the path of self-power became his disciples and were amazingly productive in their own journey towards enlightenment. You know, people who you would never think, people who were like mentally challenged and couldn't understand anything. People like this fella Angulimala, who was actually a crazy person. We would say today maybe he was a schizophrenic, but he lived in the woods, and what he did was he would waylay people and he would kill them, and then he would cut their finger off, and he had a necklace of fingers that he used to wear. And so he became a disciple of Shakyamuni's. Okay, it's one of the most beautiful stories about how that happened, but we'll go into that another time. So the first age of the Dharma, the time that Shakyamuni was alive, and for about 500 years after, many, many people could understand the Dharma properly because of the energetic field of Shakyamuni. And those people could not only understand the Dharma, but they were able to put it into practice to make great strides. Now, the second age of the Dharma, which started after the first age ended, is called the age of semblance of Dharma. And what this means is that during that age, there were still a lot of people who were able to understand the Dharma, but very, very few of those people could actually leverage their understanding to create great transformation in their lives. And this was a time when there was a lot of philosophy, but people were really not becoming advanced on the path very well anymore. There were only a few at that point. And so in this age, because Shakyamuni had receded in time and space, it was very difficult for people. Now, the third age of the Dharma, which is the age we're still living in, is called the age of corrupt Dharma, or the age of Dharma decline. And in this age, and this is something you really need to think about if you're listening to this, in this age, not a single person can really use the Buddha field of Shakyamuni, which has receded in time and space, in order to become a Buddha anymore. So that's the first thing, if you're listening deeply, that you need to understand. The Dharma of Shin Buddhism teaches that no one can become a Buddha by using any of the paths, the tools, the methods of self-power Buddhism, where you're doing practice or you're not doing certain behaviors or you're doing certain other behaviors that are specifically designed to lead you up the mountain and not have you fall down. Okay? We're just not there anymore. Not possible. Not even for the best Buddhist that you know. Your favorite teacher cannot become a Buddha by what he's doing. Not going to happen. Not now. Not 20 years from now. Not in his next lifetime. Not in 100 lifetimes, 1,000, or even 1,000,000. That's the way it is. So what does work in this age of Dharma decline, is not relying on our self-power, but relying on the other power of this other Buddha named Amida. And when people find out about this other Buddha, and they become convinced that Shinwen is right, and that nothing that they do will help them, they begin to listen and think about entrusting themselves in their karmic destiny entirely, completely, and utterly to Amida Buddha. It's such a radical proposition within Buddhism because this is the only one of the 84,000 schools that even talks about this, that many people have a really difficult time getting their mind around this the first time they hear it. For some people, it's easy because these people are nobodies and they have nothing, or for some people, it's easy because they've experienced this amazing crash and burn in their own life, and they've seen, even though they've attempted to be good Buddhists, that ultimately they just can't do whatever it is you need to do to make self-power work. And so these people tend to be easily able to understand this. That was my particular case. I had already been a Buddhist. I knew a fair amount. I did a certain amount of practice. I was trying to be a good Buddhist. Sometimes I was better, sometimes not so much. But then I had some critical events happen in my life around death and family members and really tragic stuff. And I just fell apart. I literally couldn't think straight. I couldn't think 2 sentences in a row. I couldn't do any of the practices I used to do. I was destroyed mentally, in a sense, and that lasted for quite a while. And it was during this time that I started to really pay attention to Master Shinran's teachings, because I knew, and we call this the second pillar of True Shin Buddhism, which says you cannot achieve your own aspiration for Buddhahood by your own efforts, no matter what you do and no matter how long you do it for. And this was where Shinran departed from all the other teachings. And so he taught specifically, let go of your self-power efforts and rely entirely upon the other power of Amida Buddha. Now, he also said, in this regard, that if you're trying to rely on Amida Buddha and walk the path of true Shin Buddhism, you'll never achieve your goal as long as you're holding on to some vestigial self-power ideas and practices. Okay? Master Renyo wrote a letter, and it was one of his greatest letters, and in essence he said, you know, if you're dating Jane with the expectation that you're going to marry her, then you can't start going out with Sally. Sorry. I mean, if you're a polyamorous type person, that will work in real life. But in terms of the Dharma, you're going to go out with Jane or you're going to go out with Sally. You're not going to go out with both. It just literally doesn't work. You will end up getting nowhere. And I've had folks in our Sangha, good folks, well-intentioned folks, and these are folks who come in having studied spirituality and different metaphysical systems, you know, for their whole life. So they're pretty brilliant and they're pretty dedicated folks. And yet I tell them the first thing they have to do is put all that stuff aside. And they say yes, but they basically won't do it because it's very hard for them. They have an addiction to all that stuff that they read and listened to and picked up in literature. And they need that stuff and they need more of it and more and more and more. And so when I say to this person, and this has actually happened in the Sangha, listen, my friend, we've been talking for 5 years now, and what you need, and it never seems to have turned into a breakthrough for you. And I said to this guy, what you need to do is take all your sacred books, your metaphysical books, and the whole kit and caboodle, the DVDs, whatever you got, you need to put it in a box, tape the box shut, and stick it in the closet or the attic or the basement or wherever. You just have to take that stuff away from yourself, not forever, but for right now, so you can thoroughly check out Shin Buddhism in a way that's appropriate. You can listen deeply without the distraction of all these other ways and means to try to become an enlightened being. And when I actually said this to this guy, he was so desperate at this point, you know, he'd been trying unsuccessfully for so long, that he says, you know what, I'm just going to do what you say at this point. I haven't done that up to now, I'm going to be honest, he said to me, but I'm going to do what you say. I said, great. And a week later, literally, he emails me and he says, you know, Amida has given me his Shinjin. And ever since then, he's ecstatic because he was seeking his whole life, literally, as an adult. And he's about my age, a little older, so 40, close to 50 years perhaps. And finally he says, I found what I was looking for. Because what you're really looking for right now, even if you don't know it or you don't believe it, is the gift of Amida's Shinjin in your life now, which means that when this life is over, you will absolutely, unconditionally, really and truly become a true Buddha yourself. And that's what you want. And that's what I want. So, bottom line, and again, you need to listen deeply and think about this. You've got to put away Sally if you're going to seriously think about Jane. Shin Buddhism is Jane, and everything else you think, everything else you believe, every other spiritual idea you have from Buddhism or any other spiritual path, you got to put that in the box for now, not forever, and you got to tape the box closed and throw it in the closet until you're finished looking for Shin Buddhism to tell you anything. Okay? So I hope this is absolutely and utterly clear for everyone. Now, I have one question that comes up often, and I've answered it many, many times since I started this Sangha back in 2006. And the question goes like this. Well, what if you want to do some sort of self-power practice, not so much to become a Buddha, but simply because it's going to help you feel better? We don't expect it's going to do anything for me permanently, But let's say I suffer from chronic anxiety, okay, very common problem today, and I'm popping Xanax or some other psychoactive medicine. If I can use Buddhist techniques and maybe put away the Xanax and wherever else I'm taking, that would be such a good thing. Is it okay to do Buddhist techniques in that kind of situation? Or you might have somebody who says, look, I'm one of the 50% of Americans who suffers from serious back pain, and it's really just ruining my life. So my doctor says he's got something for me to try beside opiates, Vicodin, OxyContin, kind of things they actually sell on the street instead of heroin, but these are legal drugs that are prescribed by doctors, and people get terribly addicted to them all the time. It's a shameful and utterly common situation. So the guy says to me, Paul, my doctor has this thing for me to try to manage my chronic pain, but it involves doing some sort of meditation practice that was first taught to the doctors by this Zen teacher. Happens to be a guy named John Kabat-Zinn. Okay, and the guy says to me, "Is that okay?" I said to him, "Absolutely, it's okay. You're doing this meditation, this Zen-based meditation. You're not doing it to become a Buddha. You're doing it to, get rid of the toothache in your body, get rid of that huge pain. There's nothing wrong with using Buddhist techniques to accomplish what I would consider humane, secular goals of reducing suffering. I just want you to know that by doing that meditation, you've got to be clear in your own mind. This is not to make karmic merit for myself. This is not to advance me on the path of the Pure Land to climb up that mountain. This is just to take care of my anxiety or my back pain or whatever it is. Okay. And if that's why you're thinking about doing some sort of self-power practice, not for Buddhahood, but to manage your suffering, absolutely go for it. Just go do it. Okay. Nothing wrong with it. Some Shin Buddhist teachers have said, no, you can't do anything like that. No meditation. Never. And so I say back to those teachers, can you imagine, as far as you know, the Buddha, whether it's Shakyamuni or Shakyamuni or Amida, you're a teacher of Shin Buddhism, so you're a person of Shinjin. Can you ever imagine either of those Buddhas saying anything like that to somebody on the path, somebody who's a disciple of Shakyamuni? Would Shakyamuni ever say to anybody, no, you need to take your illegal heroin and don't do any sort of meditation to make your back pain go away? All right, no, that's wrong. I mean, you don't even have to be a Shin Buddhist. Anybody who reads Shakyamuni's words knows he would never, ever say such a thing. Just like he would tell you not to get your toothache taken care of. He would never say such a thing. Or if you have kidney disease, like I have, not to go on dialysis. And if they'll accept you for a transplant, not to go get a transplant because somehow there's a conflict. Shakyamuni is all about this. He said, everything I teach is about suffering and the end of suffering. So he will never teach something to you or anybody that would increase his suffering. Never, ever. So I hope that explains this idea of self-power versus other power. It's a simple idea, but it's such a huge paradigm shift that most people I know of have real trouble taking it on board because they've learned other teachings in Buddhism, because they're used to depending on themselves and never depending on some sort of higher power. Okay, they just don't get that. And so it becomes really hard for them to really, understand that this is the essence of the true teaching of the Pure Land Way. We want you to depend entirely upon Amida Buddha and his primal vow, if your karma is ripe enough to allow you to do that. Okay, please feel free to ask me any questions always that you have that might clarify this for you. It's so central to our school that I really, really want you to understand it as well as I do. See you again soon. Thanks.